The content of this radio show is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health professional with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition.
Welcome to One Soul Radio, an interactive conscious conversation grounded in psychology and inspired by spirit, with Steve Hasenberg and Cali Alpert.
Welcome, dear friends, to One Soul Radio here on Unity Online Radio. This is the show for you and by you, a virtual community creating conscious conversation and the opportunity to have a place to delve a little deeper in life than you may do on your own. We are here to offer you a unique perspective from both worlds at the same time. I'm Cali Alpert, happy to say on the left coast in Los Angeles with my dear friend, co-host and spiritual psychotherapist, Steve Hasenberg.
Yes, Callie and I had dinner last night.
We did.
For the first time since last summer.
Yes.
But you brought the cold weather with you.
I can blame it on me.
I do. Because it was 41 degrees at the top of Topanga Canyon last night.
Yes, it was. And we're going to keep hearing about it, apparently.
And we could not eat outside because it was too cold.
I know.
But we had a great time.
We did have a great time, and it's just a joy to be in the same space versus the virtual space. Yes, it's a very important. I highly recommend it. Being in person, it's really a good thing. Total gift. So today we're going to continue our mini series, Spiritual Self-Help Legends. And today we're going to focus on Mooji, street artist turned global teacher. So Mooji was born in Jamaica, raised in his early years by his father and then by his very strict uncle in the UK. And he endured a lot of hardship in his early and coming up years. By age 30, he was married and had a young son, and he was working as a street artist and later an art teacher when an encounter with a Christian launched his spiritual path. In 1993, he left his wife and his son. His son would die the next year, and Mooji traveled to India. And this is where he encountered his guru, Papaji, who would change his life and shape the wisdom that would soon attract and inspire followers around the globe, especially Steve, who turned me on to Mooji. We will discuss how Mooji has impacted us, but again, particularly you, because I'm just learning about him, and you've been a loyal student and appreciator for a long time. Devotee. Share thoughts and stories about the seeker's path, and we'll break down some of Mooji's most poetic and prophetic quotes that can inspire us all. So what is a devotee? Why don't we start with that? Because it's so interesting when you think about like the term teacher in spiritual world, because now I'm accustomed to it. But teacher doesn't mean you're in a classroom, looking at a group of people. Teacher doesn't mean it's even a physical person in an earthly body on earth at the same time. Teacher can mean your spiritual teacher from another ascended. Right. So can you talk a little bit about what devotee means and why you use that term? What makes you a devotee?
Well, I like the word devotee.
You just want to say it.
Because it feels dramatic.
Yeah.
So for me, devotee is somebody who has a passion. A devotee is obviously devotion. And so I have a passion about Mooji. And I've had that passion ever since my daughter, Elise, turned me on to him.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, she was listening to Mooji on YouTube. And she sent me some tapes. Well, she said, go to YouTube, look at this up. And I was absolutely smitten. And I don't get smitten easly, you know that.
You're a very tough audience.
I'm a kind of almost anti-smitten. So I got smitten with him. Why? You can ask me about this.
Why?
Because he's so poetic. I'm a big devotee of poetry. And Mooji is an artist, first of all. So artists tend to be very sensitive certain kinds of artists are extremely poetic and articulate, and Mooji was one of those people, so he kind of hooked me.
And you also, take one to know one, are a genius artist, but I can say that because you won't.
Thank you.
So did you start following him right after that,
Yeah,
religiously, as it were?
I did, because he obviously was saying things in a certain way that deeply resonated with me. I wasn't looking for another path, but he was describing the spiritual experiences that I was having in a way that made it even more clear to myself, which is so cool.
It's really an amazing thing when you find people that you resonate with in life on any level. I mean, I get a little overly excited about that because it's such a special, precious thing when it happens. And also with spiritual teachers, I guess is a terminology. You and I both have had the gift and luxury of being around a lot of them by nature of our own personal paths and our work. And so after a while, you can get, you get a little discerning, I guess, like anybody does in any orbit that they travel in a lot. And so, I think it says a lot when somebody really kind of breaks through the anti-smitten wall,
Do you have a devotee that you met at Omega? Are you a devotee of somebody?
Um, so interesting. I don't connect with that word,
Oh, okay.
I have to think about that a little bit more.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Plus given that I work there, I'll be an, equal opportunity lover. I don't want to discriminate. But I'm half joking. I really need to think about it. Certainly, there are plenty of teachers I resonate with more than others. Yeah. Yeah, I do. And it really is like an energetic thing. It really is just like, it's not
Purely
just
energetic.
it's not something you can really describe. It's the same as when you meet anybody in your life that you have sort of chemistry with. There's
Right?
spiritual chemistry, Yeah.
And as I always say, chemistry is memory.
Ah, meaning like recognition from another burst of stardust somewhere.
Yeah, it's like either recognition of a certain spiritual pathway that you remember,
Yeah.
the recognition of a particular person whose voice or attitude is something you remember. And so that sparks this memory. And then all these resonant like cells start to activate and go, oh my God, I feel like I'm at home.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I get that. I get that. So before we go further and get specifically into Mooji today, I want to invite anybody listening who would like to call in, share your love for Mooji, talk about just the overall concept of teachers and devotees and whatever rocks your world, your own spiritual path. We always want to hear. The number is 816-251-3555. We'd love to hear from you, as we always do. So Mooji today is about 69 years old. So let's talk a little bit just about how he came up. Again, a lot more. I've learned. I've become a sort of a quick study on it, but I know you have a lot more of his story, your familiarity with his story. So he was raised in Jamaica, right? Born in Jamaica. Parents got divorced when he was young.
1 year.
Oh, he was only in Jamaica for 1 year before his parents got divorced, and then he went to live with his father in the UK.
Yes.
There was a bit of a sordid family story there, in that his father ended up falling in love with and marrying a cousin of his. Right? And so, again, I imagine that must have been a very specific and challenging energy to be around, and complicated for a little boy. And when his father died at age 8, Mooji was then raised by an uncle, a very, very strict uncle, until he went back to his mom as a teenager and became a street artist. So even that, just all of that transition and different influences in different homes at such a young age, makes a significant imprint. Anything you wanted to add there?
Yeah, I'd like to say that when there's chaos in childhood and, adolescence, there's often, everybody has chaos, I must
Yeah.
say this, but when there's excessive chaos moving from one parent to another, grandfather, uncles, all this stuff, people like that either tend to get very depressed, or in the best way, they tend to search for meaning. And so I think his search for meaning probably started very young. Probably his search for security, which meaning provides sometimes, started very young. And he was already a seeker, seeking something that was more fulfilling, loving, harmonious. That's certainly what happened to me.
Raising my hand.
Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting. I never even, I'm just thinking, it's so interesting. I never even really put that together. It makes perfect sense from a psychological and spiritual perspective now in retrospect when we get a little older and wiser. But I think I've told you this. I think about like all the times that I was aware of some sort of God presence and, a larger thing going on when I was a very young kid, and also grew up in a very chaotic, very dysfunctional, very angry and dramatic and volatile, and you name it, and also really fun. And really, it was a lot of different things. It was roller coaster house. So I got both sides of the spectrum and everything in between. But I never tied that, because I did actually start seeking, or whatever word we like to use. I don't use that word so much anymore. In my teen years and definitely early 20s, but I wasn't putting it together at the time that might have been a byproduct of feeling so lost and not at home.
Well, that's right. Not at home, at home.
That's our
Right?
new bumper sticker.
That definitely causes a lot of momentum
Yeah.
to try to find home.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I think we all are seeking, like E.T., we're all seeking home.
It's true.
In one way or another, through other people, through drugs, through spiritual pursuits, through accumulation of money. We're seeking home, security.
Right. It's true. And we could just, get right to the end of the story and just share the punchline for those who might not know it already. I'm sure many people listening do. Is that there's only one place that home really lives, and it's inside of us. And it's just a matter of shedding all the layers so that we can remember all that. But man, it takes quite a ride to get there and remember. It's really quite a trip. So yes, I like good offshoot conversations. I like this. I'm just thinking of that. I have an image of tumbleweed for me lately, because I feel like I've just been a tumbleweed, like floating around, drifting around between moving jobs, landing in a place, out here now in California. The biggest motivation being that this is where I have the most people that I love in one spot, and I needed to just feel that. That was my initial motivation.
Okay, there we go.
So it really, that definitely, that the feeling is still very present sometimes. So then another tragedy in Mooji's life in 1985, his sister was shot and paralyzed in a police raid. Do you know the details of this story? Was it
all I know about it, it caused a great riot called the Brixton riot. And she was obviously the catalyst, the match that lit the fire. So that was also big for him, right? That person from Jamaica who's black-skinned begins this riot that takes over this entire area.
And so 2 years later, he had an encounter with a Christian. I don't know what that means exactly in terms like in what form or denomination that came in the 80s, on the streets of Brixton. But it sounded like it was a chance encounter that moved him and launched his spiritual quest. And at this time, he was still a street artist, perhaps an art teacher by then, sometime right in that time frame, right?
Graphic artist.
And then at age 40, as I said in the introduction, I think I said in the I think I said in the introduction. Yeah, he had hit right by age 30 he was married and he had a young son. By 40 he quit his life in the UK and went to India. So basically left his young family behind to prioritize his soul searching and his spiritual quest at that
That's
time.
what the Buddha did. Actually, the Buddha left his son and his wife, which in India was obviously an arranged marriage, but we're going to assume they had a good marriage. And he left at 26 to find God. And he left at 26, really, in terms of the Buddhist principles, to understand how to overcome human suffering, old age, sickness, and death. And that propelled him on his journey. And like Mooji, he was seeking a spiritual teacher. And well, I'm not going to tell this whole story, but he was seeking a spiritual teacher. He didn't find one. And then he years later sat under the Bodhi tree. And then we're going to tell the story, which I'm not going to finish yet. Mooji had a spiritual teacher, Papaji, and that didn't satisfy him either.
And just to tease this up a little bit more, because this story, when you start putting the pieces together, some of our greatest spiritual icons, and we're going to talk about a few of these today, there's another common thread, another similarity in that, like Ram Dass, when Ram Dass, after he had been through his academia chapter, after he had been through his psychedelic chapter, and then decided he wanted to go search for higher consciousness in India. When he was first there, I can't remember how long it was, if it was a month or I might be making that up. And we do have, by the way, a very special Ram Dass-centric show brewing, which we're very excited about and we'll share with you in the coming weeks. He was on the verge of leaving. He was just about to call it quits. I didn't find it. I looked around. Is it you? Is it you? Are you the one with the knowledge? Are you the one with the wisdom? Are you the one who's going to teach me what I need to know? And he didn't find it. And he was literally about to leave the country until he met the one person, Bhagwan Das.
Yes, that's right.
Who introduced him to his great teacher, Maharaji. So it's very interesting how these things happen. So that's a good sort of cliffhanger for the Mooji story, right?
Cliffhanger.
Is there something you wanted to say about that?
Only the fact that my old dear friend Dick H. was in India, probably 15 years ago, seeking enlightenment, seeking a guru. And he looked, nothing happened. And the day before he was going to leave, somebody came up to him he didn't know, and he gave him a card, and he said, "Go see this man."
Oh, wow.
And so he changed his airplane flight, and he went to see this person, and he sat in a kind of living room. And when he was sitting in the living room, he noticed on the wall was the same painting that he had in his living room. And the man came out, and the man proceeded to tell him all about his life.
Wow.
And he became, for a period of time, his teacher.
Oh, I love these stories. I love these stories. I have such goosebumps. I don't think I haven't heard that story from you.
Right.
That's so good.
Right.
And it's so what does that speak to? When you think about people that are looking for teachers. When I was at the ashram that I visited over the holidays, and I took an extra like bhakti yoga program, course, and one of the lectures was devoted to finding your teacher. And I she talked about the idea of having to ask, because how much control do you really have over that, except for when you're ready, you try to be open, you do your proper praying or acting, whatever, asking. But do you think that these stories all have surrender as their common theme? Like the day
Yes,
that
I
you
do.
know that you're going to like leave and you're throwing your hands up, then suddenly the magic comes in,
Yes,
right?
I do.
And your teacher always finds you. They always say energetically, because I'm
Yeah,
thinking about Yogananda, I believe also there, right? There's always, teachers always sort of know on some other level well
right,
before we meet them.
right.
Hmm.
So yeah, I
Beautiful.
agree that when you give up, a lot can happen. Not always. A lot can remain empty, but it does occur. And if we talk about Buckminster Fuller, who people may or may not know, he was the father of the geodesic dome.
Right.
And when he was 24, he was going to commit suicide. And he went to a lake. He was going to jump in and drown himself. And as he was approaching the lake and walking in, a voice came to him and said, "You have a big mission here on earth, and you should stop worrying about how people think about you and just get on with your purpose."
Hmm.
And he did.
I'm laughing because you and I have one of our favorite themes of late, which we'll get to a little later in the show, has to do with the theme of what we're calling the path versus no path, people that have more of a spontaneous version of enlightenment. We have our list, including Buckminster, right?
Buckminster Fuller, yeah.
Fuller. And then people that have to really work and practice and struggle and scrape and claw, like yours truly, like the two of us and a lot of other people on this planet, to get to a place of wherever it is we're seeking to go. So we'll get back to that. But back to Mooji. So do you want to talk about what happens, the sort of denouement of what happens when he throws his hands up and month after month he says, I'm leaving, nothing's happening.
So
I'm there. His son had passed away.
his son has passed away. He's sitting with Papaji. So I used to sit with Maharishi. I've sat with other teachers, and you sit and you listen, and you're hoping that today he'll turn to me, Maharishi, Papaji will turn to me and say, you are anointed,
Mm-hmm.
and you will become liberated in that moment. And those days go on forever. And you're always disappointed it doesn't happen. And so Mooji was in that state with Papaji for months and finally said, who am I kidding? This doesn't work. This is not my teacher. I'm done. And he walked out, went into the streets of India, wherever he was, walking, eating something, walking. And all of a sudden, it was as if his mind exploded and he saw Papaji's face in 1,000 fragments wherever he looked. And it just went on and on and on. And he realized Papaji was calling him back. And that was his real teacher.
So that is sort of a moment. Talk about your ego sort of getting blown out a little bit, right? And something bigger coming in and kind of opening it up for you and redirecting you or landing you, whatever.
Big time,
Yeah,
right?
that's beautiful. So do we know how long he stayed with Papaji or how long he stayed in India?
Well, I think he stayed in India for a month or two more. And then he was a very charismatic individual. And even prior to the Papaji experience, people were very drawn to him. After the Papaji experience, and you'll talk about McDonald's after the break, but after the Papaji experience, he was obviously more radiant and he began to attract a lot of followers.
That's the other thing that's so interesting. You and I talk about this a lot. The difference between like nowadays, how Everyone and their mother wants to be a spiritual teacher. Everyone's an expert. Everybody's a YouTube sensation. You get the right, you spend half your life just focusing on getting your followers, and then suddenly you've got a validated spiritual teacher brand. And it's just so beautiful to be reminded that that's not what happened with a lot of these, people from the, I would say older generations, because he's really not that old, but it's just such a good reminder of how organically things can happen when they're really supposed to happen. And I'm not saying that they're not supposed to happen to people that are using digital media as one of their support systems to grow their exposure, because that's a beautiful thing too. And we'll talk about, and that actually brought Mooji further onto the map. But when you think about how people just like to hear what he said, and just to pay off that story, what he started writing his teachings on straw paper from McDonald's, the white wrapping paper, and giving them away as thoughts for the day. And that's what ultimately was the springboard for people to start putting him on YouTube little less than 20 years ago. So with that, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk more about Mooji, what it's like to be a seeker, and share some of Mooji's most poetic and prophetic quotes. We will be right back.
Welcome back to One Soul Radio with Steve Hasenberg and Cali Alpert.
Welcome back. We are here with One Soul Radio here on Unity Online Radio. We are talking today as we continue our mini-series on spiritual self-help legends, according to us, by the way, not according to anyone else, although there's definitely shared appreciation for a lot of these people we're featuring. Mooji, street artist, Jamaican street artist turned global spiritual teacher, Steve being one of his devotees. I don't even know if I'm saying the word right. So we talked a little bit about Mooji coming up in the streets of, being born in Jamaica, coming up in the streets of the UK, trials and tribulations, just the idea of what it means to be a seeker, the fact that he prioritized, he left his his wife and kid to go to India because he was more overtaken by the idea of seeking spiritual enlightenment, I guess, than anything at that time. And just to finish that thought, actually, before we move into some of the other talking points we had, I think about, because that's a big topic. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's so many examples that are popping into my head now of just like where people that love people in the truest unconditional way. And I don't know enough about his family and how his wife and kid felt about him leaving. But when you're that, it's very easy to be set up for a lot of judgment and criticism and disappointment, and being disappointing by people when you leave the earthly commitment, priority, responsibilities that you've created for yourself. Right. Nobody forced you to get married and have a kid. And then take off to do something that some would say is, of whatever higher purpose. It's very hard to know. Everybody's stories are individual. But I remember years ago, I can't remember who it was, somebody in my travels. I was much younger, so I didn't have context. And I remember this woman that I met, maybe traveling, conversationally, sort of as a confession, told me that she was just in the process of reconciling with her two daughters, who at the time maybe were 20, because this mother of two had taken off to perhaps India or wherever to seek herself. Mm-hmm. And to find her spiritual purpose, enlightenment, whatever, and was basically gone, like truly left them for the crux of their childhood and teenage years, and then came back and was trying to reconcile. And I don't know this woman anymore, so I have no idea how that went. But at the time, I was like, how most people would react. Really? How do you do that? Why do you leave your kids? Like all those normal human reactions, now coming from a different lens. I think it's a deep, profound thing. And I'm sure it doesn't come easily to a lot of people that leave, and I'm not judging it or condoning it, but it's intense.
Right. It could be like the most extraordinary thing and the most selfish.
Yeah.
Right.
Who's to say? It's fascinating though.
So when Buddha left his family, we'll finish this course. It's a little different than Mooji's. He spent about 4 years, maybe 4, 5, 6 years traveling through India, working with different gurus and different philosophies, and never found anything. And that's when he decided that he'd go in the forest, and he sat under that Bodhi tree and made this declaration that I'm going to sit here until I attain liberation, or I will die. So that's how strong it was for him.
And he did.
And he did.
Thank goodness for
And
all
he
of us.
did, right? Even though he left his wife and kids.
Yeah, we don't hear about that part so much.
No.
I'm not familiar with that part of the story.
Because he has such a large story. You know, he has a world story. So you don't hear about the people left behind. But don't forget, he was a prince. His father was a king. And so the wife and son were pretty well off. And
well, on paper, we don't know what their abandonment issues were triggered by that whole process, though.
we don't, but culturally at that time, men would often leave their families. It happened quite often, and seek liberation in the forest, but it usually happened much later.
It's really interesting. So much I could say, even back the fact that we don't hear about that side of the story, because that's important. It's
It
very
is.
easy to canonize and romanticize all these teachers and
Right.
these stories, and it's very rare. We were talking about it before the show. It's very rare that anybody has a clean bill of whatever, bill of conscience, bill of
Right.
integrity.
I don't
You
know
know.
any of us do. It's part of the deal here, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There are all kinds of things that go haywire.
Yep. It's true. Um. So we talked a little bit about the break about how Mooji, his thoughts for the day started to find their way to McDonald's straw paper wrapping, and that's how they got sort of distributed on the streets of, I guess it was Brixton or wherever he was in the UK. And then his YouTube career was launched in 2005 when most of us weren't quite aware of YouTube, or at least a lot of us weren't. It was really at the burgeoning stages of that, right?
It
And that's
was.
really, right? Isn't that what sort of really
Yeah,
launched his whole thing?
it did. So he he went viral before before viral was a word, and people started being attracted to him. And I know we talked about this in our pre-production, so I want to bring it up, which is the differentiation between having a path
Yes.
and not having a
This
path.
is our favorite topic of the week, at least. Go ahead.
So I was talking to Callie about the fact that there are a number of individuals that we're very enamored about who had no path, and we'll discuss what that means. So the list has right now the list is increasing. Right now we have Buckminster Fuller, Byron Katie, Eckhart Tolle, Matt Kahn. Matt may not agree with this, and Anita, who we talked about last week.
Right, more Johnny. And also Rob Wergan, a little bit, the
Okay,
energy
people know
healer,
who that is. Yeah,
right? Pretty esteemed energy healer. And Werner Erhard.
Werner
You told me
Erhard.
about that one.
I did. So what does it mean to have no path, Callie?
Well, so I'm laughing. And yeah, we do have to, I think probably with Matt Kahn, that's the one that we probably, it's not as hard a line as some of these other
Right.
stories are. But we'll have to delve into that a little bit more deeply and find out. But with especially like Byron Katie and Eckhart Tolle, the ones that we've talked about a lot, both of them were horribly depressed and suicidal. Byron Katie was in a mental institution.
Mm-hmm.
Eckhart Tolle found his moment of space and enlightenment right when he was on the verge of taking his life.
Yep.
We started to clump in more, so we want to be careful here too, because not to put these all together. These are unique stories, but our point is that like Anita Moorjani is one who was living, her earthly life, had a very powerful near-death experience, having been riddled with stage 4 cancer, and then when she crossed over and collected the lessons that were meant for her to gather while she was there, brought them back, and her whole life changed. Her healing was spontaneous. So what we're talking about is the difference between people like Steve and I and most people we know that grow up in a certain way or on a certain path and have to really work hard and make it a very devoted, effortful, committed, use the word vigilance and patience a lot with me over the years, path in order to get to this place of enlightenment or freedom or liberation, the words that we use, right? Whereas with some of the examples we're talking about, either it happened very spontaneously or it happened pretty early in their life and the road, they were already kind of in flow and in divinity and with source at a pretty young age and had an understanding. So the roadblocks weren't that loud. So that's kind of what we're trying to express here, right?
Right. But for 99.9% of us sapiens, the spiritual path is a long one, can be arduous, can be ecstatic, can be frustrating. And we're working on our thoughts and our feelings and what the Buddhists call the mind stream. And we're differentiating that mind stream from our true nature. And that takes quite a long time. For the people who had no path, in quotes, they had that separation between the mind stream and their spiritual nature, or we could say between the release of their ego and the experience of their spiritual nature spontaneously.
Right.
So,
or gently.
Gently, sometimes not gently. And we're saying this because we want all of you to know who are on a spiritual path that these experiences that we read about in all the self-help books or that Mooji talks about and other gurus on the YouTube are not easily, it's not easy to come by them.
Right.
They take quite a bit of work.
Right. And it's such an it's such an important thing to remember. And again, you know, I want to just be really careful here. Certainly for like the experiences that Byron Katie or Eckhart Tolle had, or Anita Marjani or the rest, we're not in any way minimizing the amount of pain and suffering that they experienced. What we're talking about is how the enlightenment piece and the merging with a higher level of and regular level of flow happened literally overnight.
Right.
Or instantaneously. Rob Workin had a story like that as well, where he, I don't want to butcher it, but in his moment of sort of awakening was contemplating taking his life and had a spontaneous experience, astral experience on a beach where he was surrounded by angels that spoke to him and told him that he needed to stay and what his purpose was and led him into healing, which is something that he does and, you know, impacts and helps a lot of people now. So that's really the distinction that we're making. So where do we put Mooji? What side of that? What category?
Well, Mooji was definitely a seeker.
Yeah.
But he had a spontaneous enlightenment. And that changed his entire life. We could say spontaneous enlightenments are biblical.
Right. Hit upside the head, lightning bolt style.
Walk on your horse on the way to Damascus. You're struck by lightning.
But then again, I mean, you like, so let's talk about you for a moment. My favorite topic, you. So you have, I can't measure equal parts, but you have a beautiful long trajectory of amazing astral ego dissolution, source, divinity stories that you've had since a very young boy that continue and get more robust as you've gotten older. You've also worked your ass off to get to this place. So some of them happen spontaneously before you even started your ride.
They did.
And then others are happening more recently as a result of the amount of spiritual practice that you have invested in yourself, right?
Right.
So that's an interesting combo that you don't hear that much. I just want to recognize that.
I've had biblical experiences.
You have.
and I've had extremely mundane experiences.
Yeah.
And I've had a lot of experiences walking in swamps with alligators and part of the big journey. So yes, I've had both. Thank you for pointing that out.
It's just interesting. Yeah. It's like I
Yeah,
just see two, I'm looking at you, I'm just seeing two parallel
yeah,
lines, you
that's
know?
true.
So yeah, I'm still, I can't even talk about myself. I have no objectivity whatsoever. So let's talk about some of the beautiful quotes. As Steve said earlier, one of your reasons that you have such an appreciation for Mooji is because of he's got an artist and poet soul and has created some beautiful art. So he's got some quotes here we're going to share. The first one: step into the fire of self-discovery. This fire will not burn you. It will only burn what you are not.
Beautiful.
I love that.
That's so beautiful.
Now, what the heck does it mean?
What you are not, if we want to go back to Don Miguel Ruiz, it has to do with all of the conditioned responses, all of the ideas that we've learned from our parents, all the ways we've had to conform. And truthfully, that is everything that we're not.
The indoctrination, the checklist of
Yep.
Earth life, the
The
shoulds.
checklist of Earth life is very, very important and is important to our spiritual growth, but it does not allow us to know who we are. It
totally
covers it
takes us
up like
away.
clouds.
It's
Right?
amazing. It's still such a wild thing to me that we're
Isn't it?
this Earth indoctrination thing. It was so universal. We should be this. We should do that. We should fit into this. We should accomplish this. We should achieve this. We should feel this way. We should try this. We should not, shoulds. That's so common and so universal. And yet it's the biggest detraction from knowing ourselves. And so that's why when people have these quote unquote life crises where things are getting burned away and, dismantled, and horrible, difficult struggles, health crisis and financial loss and civil unrest and divorce and death and all kinds of things that, these human challenges that we all experience can often be the greatest catalyst for our greatest self-discovery and growth if we know what to do with that and lean into it, and way more easily said than done. But I think that's what this quote means.
My client lost their home 3 years ago in the Malibu fire and lost all of her possessions except one or two. Devastated for months, called me. And we've been on this journey together. And she now sees it as one of the greatest things that ever happened to her.
I got goosebumps from that.
Right?
Can you, without obviously not, I don't want to ask too deep a question in respect of this person, your client, but can you, for the benefit of everybody listening, give us the punchline of what one of the greatest gifts is, or just the general area of what she's recognizing?
Well, yeah. One of the greatest gifts is that she had to go into total surrender. She didn't know what she was going to do. And because she did eventually go into surrender, all kinds of wonderful things began to happen. Because the baggage, which we do not consider baggage at all, but for her, from her soul's point of view, the baggage that was burned away freed her, and she obtained a greater lightness of being.
Goosebumps. Beautiful. And God bless her.
Right.
Because that can't be an easy situation to deal with. Yeah. I was thinking today, I was actually just chuckling to myself like an hour ago, just because of bombardment of stuff that came up even that's around me now. And the list is just gets compounded. And today it got more compounded with things in my life that are challenging that I have to deal with. And I was just laughing at how sometimes it all starts canceling each other out, because all you can do, the more you get stuff piled onto you and the harder things get, is surrender. There's not, you can't, it's too
Right.
overwhelming. There is no rational, I got to
That's
fix
right.
this. I got to work through this. I got to find an antidote to that. It's just, it forces you more to, to just be in every single moment because it's the only thing you can do without your brain splitting apart.
Right.
And, so it really is, there's some real great beauty in that. And I'm happy to hear that about your client. Another one, and then we're going to get to our action steps. Maybe we can get through one or two more. Dying to your own attachments is a beautiful death because this death releases you into real life. You have to die as a seed to live as a tree. We actually sort of just covered that in
You
a
see,
different way.
that's why I like him so much.
Yeah.
It's kind of like Rumi,
Mm,
right? Touches me.
it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Let's get to one more that's a little
Yeah.
fresh material.
Sure.
If you make human company too important, you will not discover your true self. Relationships not based in truth are never entirely reliable and are rarely enduring. Taking time to discover yourself is the best use of time, so prioritize this.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you were saying before the show that you have a little bit of mixed feeling about that, or you don't necessarily
Well,
buy that one?
I agree with it, and at the same time, uh, we we understand that the people who are um, brought to us in this lifetime are very, very important. The people that we love, the people that we hate, they're all here as from cosmic central casting in order to help us on our path, because they're all here to help us learn. So I am not a monk. I am sure I've been a monk, but monks take a very solitary path. And I am on the path of the householder, as you are. And the beauty of the household path is you realize that every person who comes into your life is an individual that can help you grow. Or if you don't manage those situations, can help you regress. And so I see personal relationships in a very, very important way. And at the same time, I see the need for self-discovery to be very important. So I'm balanced in that.
Yeah, I think that I remember a television show I worked on years ago. I think I've talked about this, and I was sharing a big corner office in New York City with 5 other high-tempered ladies. And I used to, oh my gosh, there was so much drama and competition and all these things. And I would sit in my little corner and just sort of smile and think about how we all represented different sort of archetypes. And I would try to explain to them, like, we're not in competition. We're all on our own. We're sharing a space and we're sharing a job and our titles are the same, but each of our storylines, each of our narratives is ours uniquely. So on this day, I'm meant to do this. And on this day, you're meant to do that. It's not because of one or the other necessarily. But I feel like it's definitely a magical thing, all the people that get put in our path. And everybody's a mirror, and they're the ones that you want to look into and the ones you don't. And the ones you don't are the ones that are probably more important, but they're not fun. And they're not easy. Half the time I know enough to look at it as a mirror, but I don't still understand, in full capacity what some of them are meant to mirror. But I think when I read this quote, I'm going to do this talk very quickly. I read this more as like to seek connection at the expense of connection with yourself, because it's our natural reflex as humans, like to want to have company, to not want to be alone on a Saturday night, I don't know if it's as shallow as what he meant, but, or vice versa, I'm being more shallow. But I think that that's sort of how I interpret it, that if you don't stand in your own space and hold your own space in your own relationship and love affair with yourself first, that it's sort of a moot point to kind of do it with everybody else. So it's interesting, different interpretations of beautiful things. So quickly, our action steps for today in honor of Mooji and some of the quotes and inspirations that we have enjoyed as we've researched the show, put the show together for you. First one is to write a list of 3 attachments that you would like to get rid of from your life. It could be an attachment to a person, to a vice, to a habit, to an obsession, whatever it is for you. Pick one of them And practice releasing it every day. Even if it means in your mind you just pretend to release it, just to give it that kind of energy and reframe your relationship with whatever that thing or person is. Secondly, take 10 minutes out of the time you typically devote to social media or texting or watching reruns of whatever you binge on, and try trading it in for 10 minutes of silence alone without anything to activate or stimulate your mind. So you have a natural inclination to reach for your phone after dinner. Trade that in for 10 minutes of going and sitting quietly, in your bedroom and just staring at the wall in silence, or closing your eyes and focusing on the space between your eyebrows or whatever. We're not even asking for a formal official meditation, just a trade out to rehabituate and see, just notice how you feel. Notice if that feels different in your body and how you feel the next day about it. I should take my own advice with a few things I'm saying here too. There's a concept. And then finally, say yes to something that you're accustomed to saying no to. And that's in honor of one of our other favorite teachers, Michael Singer, the author of Untethered Soul and the Surrender. Is it the Surrender Project or Experiment? I always confuse. Right. Okay, Michael Singer. So what's an example of that? Like if you're, maybe you're an introvert and you really spend a lot of time alone and you say no to every social invitation and somebody asks you to go out to dinner. Maybe it's as simple as just saying yes for a cup of coffee, so there's a limited finite time without a major commitment. It's just about shifting the energy around all these things, right? So one
footnote, I know we're almost up. I think the latest study is that people spend between 8 and 10 hours either on TV or social media per day.
Per day?
Per day.
Wow. Then I really am weird. Okay. Wow. That's amazing. That's really scary. Wow. Write 3 things a list of 3 attachments you'd like to get rid of. Pick one and practice releasing it. Take 10 minutes out of your time that you typically devote to social media or your iPhone, whatever, and trade it in for 10 minutes of silence, and say yes to something that you typically say no to. With that, we're going to thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next week. Find us on Instagram, One Soul Radio, and Facebook, One Soul Radio Podcast. We will see you next week.